By the time I found my escort card at my sister's wedding, I had already been erased 3 times that day. First from the bridal suite, then from the front row at the ceremony, and now from the family tables, where a quiet little service code on a cream card told the staff what I was only just beginning to understand. I was not being seated as family. Around me, Alden House Estate glowed with white roses, candlelight, and the kind of money that knows how to make exclusion look elegant. My mother stepped to my side, smelling like citrus and powder, and told me not to make a scene. What she didn't know was that the plain envelope in my clutch held a cashier's check for $8,500. 8 months of sacrifice from a 33-year-old public school counselor who had spent most of her life being dependable, useful, and easy to overlook. My name is Brenna Vale, and this is the night I stopped trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided where I belonged. Then I found my card. It was cream-colored, embossed like everyone else's, with a small service code in the lower corner. Family and wedding party were seated closest to the center of the room. Mine had been placed with the outer grouping, the one feeding toward the overflow tables near the service corridor. I stared at it for a second too long. A young staff member in a black vest stepped beside me, glanced at the card in my hand, and gave me a polite little half-nod. "This line is for standard plated seating, ma'am." He pointed toward the far side of the room, then paused. "You're not with the family section." It was not really a question, it was a correction. I looked at him, then at the card again. I did not answer right away because my throat had gone tight in that strange, useless way it does when your body understands something before your pride catches up. That was when my mother appeared at my elbow. Celeste always smelled like expensive powder and citrus, the same perfume she had worn to every fundraiser and Christmas Eve dinner for as long as I could remember. Tonight, she looked flawless. Pale blue silk, diamonds at her ears, smile calibrated to suggest grace under pressure. "Sweetheart, don't stand here making a face." Her voice was low enough that nobody else would hear it. The seating had to balance both families and a few donor-adjacent guests. "It's one evening. Please don't do anything that makes this awkward for the Mercers." She did not say, "I am sorry." She did not say, "This shouldn't have happened." She did not even bother pretending it was a mistake. I kept my hand on the card and felt the edge of the envelope inside my clutch press against my ribs. There was a cashier's check in that envelope for $8,500, made out to Sloan and Derek. 8 months of cut corners, 8 months of saying no to things that would have made my life easier. I skipped dinners out, I postponed getting some dental work my dentist had called optional but wise. I kept driving my old Honda instead of even looking at newer used cars. Every extra dollar went into that gift because somewhere along the line I had convinced myself that generosity could do what history never had. It could prove I belonged. I wish I could tell you I saw that clearly right then. I didn't, not all at once. What I felt first was embarrassment, hot and immediate. Because in a room this polished, humiliation never arrives loud. It arrives with a lowered voice and a practical explanation. I was 33 years old. I worked as a school counselor at Lakeview North Public High School in Chicago. Most days I talked 16-year-olds through panic attacks, family blow-ups, breakup meltdowns, and the quiet terror of filling out college applications with no idea who they wanted to become. I knew how to steady a room. I knew how to regulate my own face while somebody else fell apart. I was good in crisis, useful in crisis, dependable, warm, calm, the person people came to when they needed things absorbed without drama. In my family, that had somehow become my whole identity. My mother lived on social optics, fundraiser dinners, charity board lunches, holiday cards laid out like campaign literature, the subtle ranking system of who mattered enough to mention by name. My father, Martin, had retired a few years earlier from insurance and seemed to treat conflict the way some men treated black ice, something to step around carefully and pretend had not almost taken him down. My brother, Graham, was a corporate attorney in Chicago and had been speaking in polished disclaimers since law school. He could make selfishness sound procedural if you gave him 30 seconds. And Sloane, my younger sister, was the kind of daughter my mother understood instinctively: beautiful, poised, camera-ready, socially fluent, the kind of woman who looked right in every frame my mother cared about. I was the one who helped carry the frame. At home, Sloane's engagement photo had gone straight to the center of the mantel, in a silver frame. Graham's profile in a business journal had been left open on the library shelf, where guests would see it. My life tended to live in side spaces, mentionable but not central, nice but not defining. I looked past my mother now toward the center of the ballroom. The family tables were dressed more heavily than the outer ones. Better placement, fuller florals, wine already breathing beside the settings. It was subtle if you were not looking for it, not subtle at all if you were. They had not forgotten me tonight. They had placed me exactly where they thought I would accept being placed. I slid the escort card into my clutch and lifted my eyes to my mother's face. I need to go to the restroom. Celeste gave one sharp nod, relieved by how easy I sounded. Good, take a minute. I turned before she could touch my arm, crossed the ballroom without looking at the center tables again, and kept walking until I hit the quiet marble hallway outside the ladies' room. Only then did I let myself stop. I stood in that marble hallway with my clutch pressed against my stomach and the ballroom music muffled behind the doors. And the worst part was not that I was surprised. The worst part was that some buried part of me had been rehearsing this feeling for years. Sloane got engaged on a Sunday night in October of 2025, and my mother reacted like somebody had just handed her the final piece of a life she had been curating for decades. Derek Mercer was handsome, polite, properly educated, and from one of those old Midwest real estate families whose last names still opened the right doors in the North Shore suburbs. Celeste kept saying how lovely he was, but what lit her up was Mercer. Mercer Foundation, Mercer Development Group, Mercer Gala Tables, Mercer family photos in local magazines with tasteful captions about philanthropy and stewardship. By the time dessert came out that night, my mother was already speaking about the wedding as if she had been invited into a higher orbit. I was the first person to ask Sloane what she needed, not because I thought I would be included in some special way. That was never really how it worked with us. I asked because helping was the language I had learned to use when I wanted to stay close to someone. What can I take off your plate? Sloane smiled and reached for my wrist. Oh, Bren, I want to keep this small and streamlined. Small and streamlined turned out to mean I was not part of any room where decisions were actually being made, but I was useful at the edges, useful when the signage proof had to be picked up in Wilmette before 5, useful when monogrammed cocktail napkins got sent to the wrong suburb and somebody needed to drive out after work, useful when a stack of welcome bag boxes had to make it from Chicago to Lake Forest on a Friday night, useful when Marina DeLuca, the planner, needed a fast answer on place card stock, and Sloane was in a meeting, and Celeste was at a board lunch. That became the rhythm of those months. I would leave school, answer one last parent email in the parking lot, eat half a sandwich in my car, and head north with tissue paper, ribbon, or sample linens in the passenger seat. I got very good at taking phone calls on Bluetooth while navigating evening traffic on Lakeshore Drive. I got very good at making myself available in the ragged corners of my own life. Nobody ever called it sacrifice. They called it helping. At Lakeview North, I was the counselor students came to when they needed someone to take them seriously without making them feel ridiculous for being 17. That winter, a junior named Maya Patel sat in the chair across from my desk and twisted the sleeve of her hoodie around one finger until it went tight. My mom keeps saying not everything has to become a whole thing. I waited. I told her it hurts my feelings when she talks about me like I'm not in the room. Maya looked down, and she said I was making things bigger than they are. I leaned forward and handed her the box of tissues, even though she had not started crying. When somebody keeps telling you not to react instead of looking at what they're doing, that's not maturity. She looked up at me. Then what is it? Sometimes it's just control. I heard how clean the answer sounded. I heard how easily it came. I heard, too, how completely I had failed to apply it to myself. A few weeks later, Sloane posted a photo dump from bridesmaid dress fittings. 6 women in soft champagne-toned silk, arms linked, laughing into their phones under flattering studio lighting. The caption was 2 words, "My girls." I sat in my Civic outside school and looked at the post until my screen dimmed. That night, I texted her, "Beautiful dresses. Was there a reason you didn't want me in the bridal party?" The reply came fast enough that I knew she had expected the question. I wanted to keep it close and uncomplicated. Close and uncomplicated. My sister had found a way to describe a bridal party that excluded her actual sister without ever having to say the word exclude. I called my mother because some still embarrassing part of me thought she would hear that sentence and understand how ugly it was. Instead, she sighed softly, as if I had interrupted something important. "Brenna, you're the most mature one in this family. Please don't turn this into drama." That was how Celeste worked. She never had to say I mattered less. She just kept asking me to behave like someone who should not need proof that she mattered at all. Graham played his own version of the same game. In March, he called me on a Thursday morning while I was making coffee. "I need a favor." He needed me to front $450 for part of a golf weekend tied to Derek's bachelor plans, because one of his cards was tied up with a client dinner and he did not want the charge hitting the wrong account before Monday. The explanation was fluent enough to sound temporary and technical, which was Graham's preferred style in all things. "I'll send it back this weekend." I transferred the money before I had even poured my coffee. He never sent it back. A week later, when I reminded him, he gave me a distracted grin over Sunday lunch at my parents' house and started talking about traffic on the Kennedy and some market wobble that had clients spooked. The conversation moved on, because that is what happened in my family when the thing being overlooked belonged to me. The rehearsal dinner at the Dearborn Room should have warned me more clearly than it did. The main table was all the people who made sense in the story my mother wanted visible. Celeste and Martin, Sloane and Derek, Graham and Lydia, Richard and Evelyn Mercer. People who looked balanced together in photographs, people who reflected well on one another. I was directed to a smaller table near the service door with 2 extended relatives and one of my mother's longtime friends from Winnetka. Halfway through the first course, one of the women at my table looked toward the front and then back at me. "You're the bride's sister, right?" I smiled. "I am." Her forehead creased. "Oh, I just assumed you'd be up there." At that exact moment, my mother passed by, heard enough to understand the shape of the exchange, and rested her fingers lightly on the back of my chair. "Brenna always prefers quieter corners." She said it warmly, like she was sharing a charming fact about me. The lie was so smooth, I could almost feel it settle over the tablecloth. A few days later, I was in my parents' kitchen dropping off ribbon samples when Celeste's iPad lit up on the counter with a seating draft. I only saw it for a second, but the family section was visible, and my name was not there. I turned. Why am I not on the family table draft? Celeste did not even look rattled. She swiped the screen dark and reached for a wine glass. "It's all moving around." I wanted to push. I wanted to say it had not been moving around at the rehearsal dinner, and not moved when Sloane left me out of the bridal party, and not moved every other time this family found a polished way to place me just outside the frame. Instead, I nodded, because if I stopped believing it would still be fixed, then I would have to accept that it was being designed. On the morning of the wedding, I drove out to Alden House with a small bouquet of white ranunculus on the passenger seat and the envelope in my bag. I had told myself all week that ceremony morning would feel different, more intimate, more obviously family. The bridal suite door was half open and busy with motion: garment bags, curling irons, makeup cases, champagne. A young woman with a headset checked a clipboard when I gave my name. "I'm sorry, you're not on the approved access list." I actually laughed a little at first, not because it was funny, but because my body still wanted there to be an explanation I could survive. "I'm the bride's sister." She checked again. "I'm sorry." I stepped back into the hallway and called my mother. She answered on the third ring, already sounding occupied. "Just grab coffee for a bit, sweetheart. The room is chaotic." Then she hung up. I sat down in the lounge outside the suite with the flowers across my knees and watched garment bags, florist boxes, and trays of champagne flutes move in and out through a door that did not open for me. I stayed there longer than anyone should have had to. Not because I was blind, because right up to that moment, some part of me still believed that if I waited quietly enough, someone would eventually come get me. By the time the ceremony began, I had already learned what kind of place I held in the day. I just had not yet seen how carefully they had designed it. The garden at Alden House looked like something assembled for a magazine spread: white chairs in perfect rows, pale flowers climbing the arch at the end of the aisle, a breeze light enough to move ribbons without disturbing hair. Guests lowered themselves into their seats with the quiet confidence of people who had attended weddings like this before. I followed the usher toward the front and saw it immediately. 4 chairs in the veil row: Celeste, Martin, Graham, Lydia. The white cards with their names were already tucked neatly against the backs. There was no 5th chair. I stopped for half a second, long enough that the usher noticed. "Can I help you find your seat?" I looked at the row again, as if one more glance might produce a space that had somehow been missed. "I'm the bride's sister." He checked the chart in his hand with a quick, practiced glance. "I have you in row 4. Not row 1, not row 2 with some distant cousin and a +1. Row 4. He said it politely, which somehow made it worse. I sat where he led me and folded my hands in my lap while guests continued filling in around me. From where I was, I could see the exact image my mother wanted: Sloane's side in front, Derek's side balanced opposite, the right people close enough for photographs, the right people visible when vows turned emotional. When the music shifted and everyone stood, I turned with the rest of them. Sloane looked beautiful. I can say that without bitterness because it was true. Her veil caught the afternoon light, her shoulders were steady. Derek looked the way grooms in expensive weddings always look when they have been told to let themselves appear moved, but not messy. For one suspended minute, I saw the little sister who used to crawl into my room during thunderstorms and lie with her feet pressed against mine because she hated sleeping alone. That was the problem with loving people who hurt you. Memory kept interfering with evidence. They said their vows. They spoke about commitment and loyalty and building a life with people who knew them best. At one point, Derek mentioned family, and the guests gave that soft little murmur they always give when a wedding line lands exactly where it is supposed to. I looked at the front row and saw my parents, my brother, my sister-in-law, all arranged in the frame my mother had always been trying to compose. From a distance, it looked complete. You would have had to know where to look to see what was missing. After the ceremony, guests drifted toward cocktails on the terrace and then back into the ballroom. I did what I had always done. I kept moving. I smiled at people. I accepted congratulations as if I had been part of what was being celebrated in any real way. At the escort card table, my stomach had already tightened once, so this time there was no shock, only confirmation. Table 16. The cardstock was heavy, cream, embossed in the same script as everyone else's. The small service code sat in the corner like a technical footnote. Noah Price, the catering captain I had noticed earlier, looked at the card in my hand and gave me the same careful, professional smile staff members use when they know something is off and cannot fix it. If you're headed to 16, that service starts after the reserve pairing is poured. Reserve pairing. Not ours. Not mine. I nodded like this was useful information and walked toward the edge of the room. Table 16 was close enough to the service corridor that I could hear the kitchen doors push open and shut behind the music. Not hidden exactly, just placed where nobody central had to look at it for very long. A couple in their 60s sat across from me. The woman wore navy silk and pearls. The man had the relaxed posture of someone who had spent a lifetime around banquet tables and knew how to behave when a stranger looked uncomfortable. She smiled first. "How do you know the bride?" I held her gaze. "She's my sister." The silence that followed was brief, but it had shape. The woman blinked once. Her husband glanced toward the center tables, then back at me. Nobody said anything impolite. They did not have to. The gap had become visible now. It existed outside my body. Other people could see it too. Dinner service began in waves. At the family tables near the dance floor, wine was poured first. Servers moved more slowly there, with the attention reserved for guests who were expected to matter to the memory of the evening. At 16, we were served promptly and efficiently. Nothing wrong on the plate, nothing cheap enough to call insulting, just clearly not the same experience. Different glasses, different pacing, different care. I looked once toward the center of the room. Celeste was speaking to Evelyn Mercer with that composed social brightness she used when she wanted to project total ease. Graham raised his glass during a toast. Martin sat beside my mother, hands folded, face unreadable from this distance. Sloane leaned toward Derek under candlelight as if this whole room existed exactly as she had imagined it would. No one turned to look for me. That was the moment everything inside me became very still. I put my hand over my clutch and felt the envelope inside. $8,500. 8 months of restraint. 8 months of tiny denials and practical little self-betrayals. I had told myself that gift was about generosity. Seated at table 16, I finally understood what else it had been. Payment toward my own erasure. I stood before I could talk myself out of it. The gift table ran along the side wall under low floral arrangements and soft lighting. Silver boxes, cream envelopes, registry cards tucked into crystal trays. Mine was easy to find because I had used plain craft paper, the least decorative thing on the table, and somehow the most honest. I opened the envelope, slid out the cashier's check, folded it once, and slipped it into my clutch. Then I took the escort card from my bag and placed it inside the empty envelope. A hand touched my wrist. "This is not the time." Celeste's voice was low and sharp, her smile still in place for anyone watching from across the room. I looked at her fingers, then up at her face. "If I'm not family in your seating plan, I'm not paying for the performance." Her expression changed by less than an inch, but I saw it. Not guilt, not shame, calculation. I turned and walked out before she could recover the script. By the time I reached the valet lane, I heard heels on stone behind me. "Brenna." I kept going until Sloane's voice came again, closer this time. Rawr. "What are you doing?" I turned beside my car. Her veil had been removed. Her lipstick was still perfect. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." There it was. Not what happened to me, what I had done to her. Celeste arrived seconds later, breath controlled, eyes bright with fury. "You are overreacting." Martin came through the doors behind them and stopped several feet away. Graham remained inside, visible through the glass, close enough to witness, far enough to avoid involvement, exactly where he always was. I opened my car door and looked at all of them. No bridal suite, no front row, no family table, different dinner service. My voice surprised me. It was calmer than I felt. "The worst part isn't table 16. It's that all of you expected me to smile through it and leave $8,500 on a table like my dignity was just another wedding expense." For once, nobody had a quick answer. I got into the car and closed the door. All the way back to Ravenswood, with the dark highway opening in front of me and the city lights pulling closer, one question kept circling through my head. Had I destroyed my family that night, or had I only refused the place they had assigned me in it all along? By Tuesday, my phone had become something I checked with the same dread most people reserve for medical test results. I had stopped answering calls from my family, but that did not stop the messages. My mother's texts came first, and most often. Short, controlled, devastating in the way only practiced people can be. "You humiliated your sister. You made a private matter public. I am asking you to act like the adult you claim to be." Graham left a voicemail while I was driving to work. What happened was deeply inappropriate. He paused long enough for the word to settle. "If you send the check and we handle this quietly, there is still a path back from the damage." The damage. Not the seating, not the bridal suite, not the fourth row. The damage was me refusing to play along in front of the Mercers. By Wednesday afternoon, the story had already started changing shape in other people's mouths. Tessa Holloway called while I was in the school parking lot and did not bother easing into it. "Your mother says you were emotional all weekend and took everything personally." I shut my eyes. "Does she?" Tessa was quiet for a second. "She is telling it too smoothly, Brenna." That was the first moment I felt the narrative slip a little in my mother's hands. At school, I moved through the day by muscle memory. A student crying in my office, a parent upset about attendance, a teacher asking if I could sit in on a difficult meeting. I did all of it because that was still my job, even if my own life felt like it had been knocked 2 inches off its frame. Near the end of lunch, Maya Patel sat across from me and stared at the floor while picking at the seam of her backpack. I hate when people call me sensitive just because I finally say the truth out loud. I looked at her and had the strange experience of hearing my own life spoken back to me in a 16-year-old's voice. Before I could answer, Nina Alvarez appeared in my office doorway with a file in one hand. She took one look at my face and said nothing until Maya left. Then she set the file down on my desk. "You do not owe anyone an explanation the second they demand one." I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. That afternoon, Graham called again. I pulled into a side street off Irving Park and let the engine idle. "I'm not taking sides." That was his opening line, which usually meant he was. "You don't have to. I'm trying to help you." "No, you're trying to contain me." A beat of silence. This wedding mattered beyond Sloane's feelings. There it was. "To who?" He exhaled. "To people who matter." The sentence sat between us in the car like something foul. To people who matter. Meaning the Mercers. Meaning the network around them. Meaning the kind of introductions and future access Graham considered more real than my place in the family itself. "Thank you for clarifying that." I hung up before he could recover. Marina DeLuga reached out that evening. Her message was simple. If you are willing to meet, I think there are things you deserve to know. We met the next morning at a coffee shop in Evanston, near the lake. Marina had the same composed expression she wore at the wedding, but there was a strain under it now, the look of someone stepping just far enough outside professional boundaries to be honest. I am not here to create more trouble. I know. She folded her hands around a paper cup. There were several instructions I questioned. Then she showed me just enough. An email from Sloan asking for a seating revision that moved me out of the family cluster and into overflow placement. A note tied to morning access that excluded me from the bridal suite list. A forwarded text from my mother telling Sloan I would go along with it, and that I always did. I read each one twice. Marina did not over-explain. She did not try to comfort me. She only gave me facts. I asked for clarification because sisters are usually placed differently. And I was told this was intentional. I stared at the screen until the words stopped blurring. That was the moment the floor under me changed. Not because I learned they had been cruel. I already knew that. It changed because cruelty is one thing and design is another. They had built the evening around the assumption that I would absorb it. Later that day, Evelyn Mercer called. Her tone was measured, almost formal. I hope this is not overstepping. It isn't. I noticed enough at the rehearsal dinner to know something was wrong. She did not offer pity, she offered recognition. A family does not place a daughter at the edge of the room by accident, not in a wedding like that. There was something almost merciful in how plainly she said it. Marina had confirmed the mechanics, Evelyn confirmed the meaning. That night, I spread everything across my small dining table in Ravenswood. The escort card, screenshots, notes from memory, my mother's messages, Marina's confirmations. The pattern rose up at all once, no longer separate incidents, but a system with the same architecture in every room. Sloan at the center, Celeste arranging, Graham smoothing, Martin seeing just enough to retreat. I called my mother the next morning. We need to talk. Relief flooded her voice so quickly it made me ill. Of course, come for brunch on Sunday. We'll put this behind us. She thought I was coming back to repair what I had broken. Sunday morning, the house on Sheridan Road looked exactly as it always did when Celeste wanted to stage normalcy. Hydrangeas by the entry, linen napkins, quiche cooling on the counter, a pitcher of orange juice sweating beside a bowl of berries. You could have photographed the dining room for a magazine spread called Grace Under Pressure. Everyone was already there. Celeste at the head of motion, if not the table. Martin with his coffee, Graham leaning back like a man prepared to sound reasonable no matter what facts crossed the room. Sloan upright and brittle in cream cashmere, her wedding set bright against the handle of her mug. Derek beside her, quieter than the others, watchful. I sat down, placed my bag beside my chair, and let the silence settle. Celeste opened first. This family has been through enough this week. Graham folded his hands. We need to talk about moving forward like adults. Sloan looked at me with wet, offended eyes. You made me look ridiculous. I looked at each of them in turn. Then I reached into my bag, set 3 printed pages on the table, and asked the only question that mattered. Would anyone here like to tell the truth before I do? Nobody answered. Sloan looked at the pages first, then away from them too quickly. This is not what it looks like. Derek reached for the top sheet before anyone else could stop him. Celeste straightened in her chair. We were trying to keep the day smooth. Graham leaned forward, his voice turning clipped. Where exactly did you get private vendor communication? I did not look at him, so that is your concern. Martin picked up the second page and read it in silence. Sloan crossed her arms. It was not supposed to be a big deal. That landed harder than anything else. Derek set the page down carefully. You told them to move your sister out of the family section? Sloane's jaw tightened. I told them what I wanted. Celeste tried once more. Brenna, you have made your point. I stood up and slid the remaining papers back into my bag. No, I finally said it out loud. I looked at all of them, then at the untouched plates, the pressed linen, the room still trying to look like order. I'm keeping the check. No one stopped me when I walked out. The first sign that something had changed was not dramatic. It was the quiet. The Monday after brunch, I woke up in my apartment in Ravenswood before my alarm, looked at my phone on the nightstand, and realized my chest was not already tight. There were still messages waiting for me. There probably always would be for a while. But the panic had loosened its grip. The performance was over, and for the first time in my adult life, I was not spending the first 5 minutes of my morning preparing to manage somebody else's version of me. Fallout came the way it usually does in families with money, social standing, and good manners. Not with screaming, not with public scenes. It arrived as temperature change. Derek stopped trying to frame the wedding as a misunderstanding. I knew because Sloane texted me once late at night, then deleted the message before I could open it. The preview had been enough. She was angry that I had made him question things that had nothing to do with me, which told me everything I needed to know. It had never only been about one seating chart. It was about what that chart revealed. Evelyn Mercer did not call again right away, but Celeste's name stopped surfacing in the little local social mentions she used to angle for. Richard Mercer became slower to respond to family planning emails. Paige, who had been perfectly pleasant to me at the rehearsal dinner in that distant, efficient way corporate lawyers often are, sent one short message 3 days later. I am sorry for how that evening was handled. That was all. No flourish, no sides taken publicly. But it mattered because it meant the story had shifted. People were no longer accepting my mother's polished version on sight. On our side of the family, Tessa Holloway did what women like Tessa have always done best. She asked questions in rooms my mother could not control. By the second week, a couple of relatives who had texted me cautious little lectures about forgiveness now were checking in with careful embarrassment, as if they suspected they had been drafted into something without being given the whole script. Celeste did not lose her standing overnight. Women like my mother rarely do. But she did lose something more important. She lost the ease of being believed. Graham made one last attempt to recover the old order. He called on a Thursday evening while I was walking home from the Brown Line, and the irritation in his voice had finally pushed through the lawyer polish. Do you have any idea how much damage this has done? I unlocked my building's front door and climbed the stairs without answering. I'm serious, Brenna. Things were manageable until you decided to make a private family matter everybody else's business. I set my bag on the kitchen counter and held the phone away for a second before lifting it back. It became everybody else's business when all of you turned it into a public message. He exhaled sharply. You always do this. I almost laughed. No, I finally stopped doing this. He did not know what to do with that. Without my silence, he had no role left to play that made him look decent. We hung up, and that was the end of whatever false neutrality Graham had spent years wrapping himself in. My father chose paper. The envelope arrived the following Tuesday. My name written in Martin's careful block print across the front. Inside was a handwritten letter, 3 pages long, folded more neatly than necessary. I made tea before I opened it, as if that might somehow steady what was coming. He wrote that he had seen enough before the wedding to know something was wrong. He had noticed the seating draft. He had asked a question. Celeste had told him it was being adjusted. Then he had done what he had spent most of his life doing. He had let the person most comfortable with control define reality for everyone else. He wrote that he was sorry, not in the big emotional language people use when they want forgiveness quickly, in a quieter way. He told me he had loved me. He also told me, finally, that love without courage had not protected me from anything. I did not call him right away. A week later, I met him at a diner in Northbrook with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been on the burner too long. He looked older than he had 2 weeks earlier. I should have done more. He said it without looking at me. Yes, that was the whole answer I had for him. The truth was enough. He nodded once, like he had earned that word, and knew it. I did not forgive him over eggs and burnt toast, but I left knowing I no longer had to keep rearranging his silence into something kinder than it was. At work, life kept moving in its ordinary, demanding way. Students still cried in my office, parents still sent late emails marked urgent. Spring gave way to early summer faster than I expected, and sometime in June, Nina Alvarez asked me to step into her office at the end of the day and close the door behind me. The district is creating a lead counselor role for the Student Mental Health Initiative. I sat down slowly. I put your name forward first. I stared at her, too tired to react gracefully. You do not have to answer today. I laughed once under my breath. I know. Then I went home and sat in my car for 10 full minutes before going upstairs, because I had forgotten what it felt like to be chosen without having to overgive first. A few days later, I walked into my bank and deposited the cashier's check into a savings account. Not a revenge account, not a rainy day account, a safety fund. The first thing in a long time that felt like it belonged entirely to me. The changes after that were small enough that someone else might not have noticed them. I bought decent groceries without calculating how much guilt they should cost me. I made dinner and ate it at my own table without waiting for my phone to light up with somebody else's emergency. My apartment felt less like a place I slept between obligations and more like a place I actually lived. The coldest part of the aftermath settled over Sloane slowly. She and Derek did not implode in some dramatic way. That would have been too easy and too false. What happened instead was quieter. The honeymoon photos stopped almost as soon as they began, and when they came back, something in the way they moved around each other had changed. Invitations became more selective. The bright, effortless confidence she had carried through the wedding photos started showing little hairline fractures around the edges. Once trust shifts inside a marriage, even beautiful rooms begin to feel smaller. Then, in late November, Evelyn Mercer sent me a note. Not on monogrammed stationery, just a card with my name written neatly across the front. If you do not already have plans for Thanksgiving, you are welcome at our table. I read it twice, not because I thought there was hidden meaning, because there wasn't. That was what made it hard to take in. No transaction, no debt, no role to perform, just a seat offered like a seat should be. That night, I opened the kitchen drawer where I had tucked the escort card from table 16. I held it under the light for a moment, ran my thumb over the embossed lettering, then slid it into the back of a notebook instead of tearing it up. I did not need to destroy it. It had already served its purpose. It marked the night I stopped shrinking myself to fit a place that had never really been mine. If you have ever been the one your family called when they needed help, but pushed to the edge when it was time to be seen, I would love to hear your story. If you had been standing where I stood, would you have left the gift on that table, or would you have taken your self-respect home with you?